and I compromised my idea. And the big thing I learned on Star Trek V for me,
for decades, the world assumed William Shatner's fortune came from Hollywood paychecks alone, but the truth is far more complicated. At 94, Shatner leaves behind a financial empire that didn't just grow from acting, but from strange deals, unexpected investments, and years of hardship so severe he once slept in a camper. But how did a man Hollywood nearly forgot manage to build a legacy this valuable? And what exactly will he leave behind for his family? Shatner's Hollywood success. Shatner's financial success story truly began in 1966, with a role that was supposed to be good, not historic. But the moment he stepped into the uniform of Captain James T. Kirk in the second pilot episode of Star Trek, Shatner's life literally changed. He carried the USS Enterprise across 79 episodes, never imagining that those 3 seasons would become the cornerstone of his financial identity. But at first, there was no reason to expect they would. His salary was modest, estimated around $5,000 to $6,000 per episode in the first season, rising to around $10,000 by the third. But altogether, his earnings added up to an estimated $300,000 to $400,000 for the entire series. While this is respectable, it was nowhere near the kind of wealth that would echo into old age. But there was a twist that would define the rest of his financial philosophy. Shatner received no residuals from syndication. When Star Trek exploded in reruns during the 1970s, when the real money started flowing, everyone but the original cast saw the payday. The studio profited for decades, but Shatner didn't. And that single financial injustice became the engine behind nearly every money decision he made afterward. He realized he could never rely on studios, contracts, or Hollywood executives to secure his future. He would have to build his fortune himself. But before he could do that, he had to stay visible. And so, in the early 1980s, Shatner returned to television as the lead in T.J. Hooker, a police procedural that gave him the financial stability he had lost. His per-episode salary climbed quickly, eventually landing somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000. Over the show's 90-plus episodes, he reportedly earned an estimated $4 to $6 million, enough to rebuild after years of inconsistent income. And then, almost unexpectedly, he found a new lane: hosting. Rescue 911 debuted in 1989 and quietly became a syndication powerhouse. Viewers tuned in every week to watch reenactments of real emergencies, and Shatner's narration became part of American television culture. He pocketed an estimated $1 to $1.5 million across 7 seasons. But what mattered more was the doors the show opened, signaling to everyone that Shatner wasn't limited to acting anymore. He was a brand, a presence people trusted, and a voice networks wanted. Years later, his role as the eccentric attorney Denny Crane on The Practice and its spin-off, Boston Legal, carried him into yet another financial tier. His salary climbed dramatically, reports suggest, to between $150,000 and $300,000 per episode in later seasons. Over more than 100 episodes, Shatner earned an estimated $10 to $15 million. And by this point, he understood something most actors don't learn until it's too late. Fame fades, but income streams don't have to. And so, while the world was watching the roles, the awards, and the flamboyant public appearances, he began laying the financial foundation that would eventually grow into an empire far larger than anyone expected. His family knew he was successful, but the full scope of what he accumulated, what he protected, invested, and nurtured, wasn't entirely clear. Shatner understood how unpredictable life in Hollywood could be. He had seen actors who earned millions end up with nothing. He had seen careers implode without warning, and that fear pushed him to build wealth that didn't rely on popularity, studios, or luck. Unsurprisingly, his Hollywood earnings are only the beginning. Other business ventures. One of Shatner's most consistent streams of income, aside from acting, came from his work as a host. In the years after his major acting peaks, he began stepping into more documentary and reality formats that needed someone with presence, warmth, and an instantly recognizable voice. Programs like Weird or What and other nonfiction series gave him a stable, dependable form of income, unaffected by box office trends or network politics. Hosting work paid well, but More importantly, it arrived regularly. But the real turning point, the one the public still misremembers to this day, came from the world of advertising. In the late 1990s, Shatner became the face of Priceline's Negotiator campaign, a role that fused humor with charisma and unexpectedly revitalized his pop culture image. The commercials became iconic, but the compensation he received was even more impressive. Shatner didn't take the usual flat fee. Instead, he agreed to receive part of his payment in the form of company stock or options, a decision that would later give rise to one of the biggest myths in celebrity advertising history. For years, stories circulated that he had made hundreds of millions of dollars from Priceline shares, turning a simple commercial campaign into a near-mythic payday. The legend grew until people genuinely believed he had walked away with a fortune so large it eclipsed anything he had made in film or television. But Shatner publicly denied the story more than once, stating clearly that he never cashed out a windfall of that size, never received the $600 million jackpot the media adored repeating, and never accumulated the kind of equity people assumed he had. The truth was simpler. His Priceline deal paid well, and the stock component gave him a respectable return. But it was not the financial miracle the world imagined. Still, the campaign itself earned him several $million over the years and reinforced one of his sharpest financial instincts. Attach yourself to a brand early, negotiate creatively, and let time amplify the value. But Priceline was only one piece of his advertising portfolio. Shatner became a fixture in national commercials across technology, insurance, and consumer brands, each campaign adding another layer to his income. These were structured, well-compensated partnerships that spanned decades, adding up quietly while audiences focused on the performances instead of the paychecks. Taken together, his commercial work generated several $million in total compensation, a stream that accumulated slowly and steadily, proving that consistency can sometimes outperform spectacle. Another source of revenue came from conventions and live appearances. Star Trek conventions, Comic-Con-style events, and sci-fi gatherings around the world regularly invited Shatner as a headliner, and the fees reflected his status. Top-tier guests often earn amounts in the five-figure to low six-figure range per appearance, and Shatner's presence, alongside autograph sessions, photo ops, and premium events, placed him among the most valuable talents on the circuit. Over the decades, these events added up to millions in income, and unlike film roles, the overhead was minimal. He also created his own touring experiences, one-man shows, intimate question-and-answer events, and storytelling evenings where audiences came to hear him recount the strange, twisting path of his life in his own voice. These shows carried enormous margins, requiring little beyond travel and production staff. Spread across years of touring, they quietly built another multi-million-dollar pillar in his financial life. Shatner also earned a significant amount of money through publishing. He wrote multiple best-selling memoirs and non-fiction books, each negotiated with sizable advances and healthy royalty structures. Across decades of publishing, his total book earnings reached seven-figure territory, supported by strong sales and consistent demand. His intellectual property extended beyond memoirs into fiction as well, most notably the Tech War universe, a series of novels that expanded into comics and later into television movies and a short-lived series. While the franchise never became a juggernaut, it generated licensing fees, residuals, and continuing royalty trickles from reprints and digital formats. And when he narrated his own audiobooks, his royalty share increased even more. Surprisingly, music too became part of his financial ventures. Shatner's albums, often spoken-word pieces blended with music, built niche but loyal audiences. While the revenue was modest compared to film or television, the royalties, digital sales, and occasional performances added another consistent, long-tail stream to his finances. In recent years, Shatner embraced digital ventures. His YouTube presence, including Shatner Vision, brought ad revenue and sponsorship income, a continuation of his lifelong willingness to experiment with new formats. His limited edition NFT trading cards, released in 2020, sold out rapidly, creating a sharp but brief spike of revenue typically seen among celebrity digital drops. Believe it or not, his likeness has appeared on action figures, posters, collectibles, and commemorative merchandise tied to Star Trek, providing continuous royalties whenever fans purchased items bearing his image. Even his personal passions have created financial ripples. Shatner founded the annual Hollywood charity Horse Show, a philanthropic event supported by sponsors and donors. And while it operated for charity, it definitely added another layer of visibility and prestige that indirectly supported his broader brand. But the most shocking aspect of Shatner's wealth is how much of that empire extends far beyond the screen, into properties, assets, and one of the most carefully built personal portfolios in Hollywood: Shatner's assets and cars. William Shatner has built his real-world fortune firmly on the ground, in brick, wood, steel, and land. His properties are some of the most surprising pieces of his financial empire, with each one revealing how cleverly he planned for the future, long before anyone imagined he'd live into his 90s, with his wealth still growing. At the center of it all is a house he bought, not with an agent's tip or studio money, but during a jog. In the mid-1970s, Shatner spotted a neglected home in Los Angeles while running through the neighborhood. Most people would have kept jogging, but he didn't. He made the decision to buy it, a rundown structure with real potential, and over time, turned it into one of the most iconic parts of his personal life. What makes this property so unusual isn't the price tag or the location, but what he did with it afterward. He didn't renovate it once or twice, but 4 separate times, each rebuilding a symbol of a new era in his life. The earliest version was simple, almost modest, because Shatner at that time was still rebuilding financially after the ups and downs that followed the early Star Trek years. Later, as his earnings stabilized and his opportunities grew, the home evolved. Walls came down. Entire sections were reimagined. The house was shaped and reshaped until it matched the life he was building inside it. And when he married Elizabeth Martin, they designed new elements together. She leaned toward minimalism, clean lines, and natural light, while he favored warmth and comfort. And so, they created a blended home with both styles. But that isn't his only real estate investment. Over several decades, Shatner acquired additional properties throughout California. However, he never flaunted these investments publicly the way some celebrities do. He didn't post photos or give magazine tours. Instead, he treated real estate like a long-term strategy, predictable, steady, and almost boring in the best possible way. Reports indicate he held multiple properties beyond his primary residence. And because he bought many of them in Los Angeles counties long before the market exploded, their value increased enormously. With decades of appreciation, rising neighborhood values, and the constant demand for celebrity-adjacent areas, some analysts place Shatner's total real estate portfolio in the 8-figure range, a figure that could support several generations of his family. But Shatner's assets extend far beyond houses and land. One of the most fascinating corners of his financial life comes from his deep involvement in the world of show horses. Shatner doesn't treat horses like hobbies or decorative luxuries. He's trained, competed, invested, and built a reputation in equestrian circles that has earned him access to top-tier facilities and ownership stakes in various horses. These stakes are definitely an unusual but meaningful financial ecosystem. But his most important luxury items are his vehicles, an entirely different world of collectibles, machines, and engines that reflect his personality almost better than any role he ever played. He was known for driving luxury cars throughout his life. Public sightings documented him behind the wheel of brands like Mercedes-Benz and Bentley, clean and refined, a reminder that he enjoyed comfort as much as performance. But that was only one layer of his automotive story. The real twist came with motorcycles. Shatner didn't just collect them, he helped design them. His collaboration with Rivet Motors and American Wrench led to the creation of the Rivet One, a limited production custom motorcycle that looked like something built for a man who had literally played a starship captain. The bike wasn't just a collector's piece, it was part of a project that fused engineering and personality, a merging of art and mechanics. The production run was small, the appeal niche but intense, and the value, as with most limited machines tied to major public figures, only grew with time. Over the years, Shatner also owned various classic cars, some tied to his appearances at events, some tied to personal tastes, and others simply held because they were beautiful machines from eras he admired. Not all were documented publicly, and not all needed to be. Another important corner of his asset profile is collectibles, and in Shatner's case, they came with a kind of built-in mystique. As one of the most recognizable figures in science fiction, he owned pieces of Star Trek memorabilia, some personal, some professional, and some inherited through decades of cultural involvement. Items tied to him hold their value in ways ordinary collectibles never could. Autographed props, costumes, production materials, personal scripts, and even items from conventions all carry a premium when linked to his name. And as the market for nostalgia continues to grow, the value of these items only becomes more pronounced. There are also the awards, physical reminders of a career that stretched across more than half a century. To most people, these trophies are sentimental, but to collectors, they are historical artifacts tied to one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment. Awards, scripts, annotated pages, and production items associated with Shatner all hold real auction value, especially as the years pass and their rarity increases. But while the world has seen the success, the fame, the roles, the interviews, and the appearances, there's a side to Shatner's story that is far more complicated. Most fans don't realize that he's had to face shadows, struggles, and private moments that shaped the man behind the fortune. The shadows behind the success. The success the world sees today hides a chapter of William Shatner's life that looked nothing like fortune. One of the most significant challenges happened when Star Trek was canceled in the late 1960s. The cast expected to move into new opportunities, but the opposite happened. Shatner found himself typecast so completely that almost every new role disappeared the moment a producer saw his face. The industry didn't know what to do with him. He was Captain Kirk now, and that label closed more doors than it opened. This situation grew so difficult that he was forced into one of the lowest financial points of his adulthood. He has spoken openly about sleeping in a camper, not as an eccentric preference, but because it was all he could afford. He traveled from job to job, performing in regional theater, small productions, and low-budget appearances just to keep money coming in. At one point, he lived on as little as he could manage, saving whatever scraps of income he earned so he could keep supporting his children. For several years, he was not a television icon. He was a working father trying to rebuild from the collapse of the career that had once given him so much visibility. Those lean years became the unglamorous foundation beneath the empire he would later build. His personal life, meanwhile, was marked by marriages that carried their own challenges. His first marriage, to Gloria Rand, began in 1956, long before fame turned him into a global name. They built a life together during the years when he was still climbing, still uncertain, still taking any work he could get. But as his career changed, so did the marriage. The pressures of an unpredictable industry, the growing demands of long production schedules, and the strain of financial instability weighed heavily on both of them. After 13 years, the marriage ended in 1969. They had 3 daughters, Leslie, Elizabeth, and Melanie, and even in the most difficult years, providing for them remained one of Shatner's priorities, especially during the period when his income nearly collapsed after Star Trek. He married again in 1973, this time to Marcy Lafferty. Their marriage lasted more than 20 years and carried Shatner through the middle stretch of his career, a period filled with both revival and reinvention. Marcy supported him through the point when Star Trek gained new life in syndication and through the resurgence that followed. But it was a complicated partnership, shaped by the constant motion of his work, the expectations of Hollywood, and the imbalance created by his growing fame. Over time, the marriage eroded through a gradual drifting apart. They finalized their divorce in 1996 after more than 2 decades together. His third marriage, to Noreen Kidd, began in 1997 and turned into one of the most painful chapters of his personal life. Noreen struggled with alcoholism, a battle that placed enormous emotional strain on the marriage and on Shatner himself, who tried repeatedly to support her recovery. He has spoken about the heartbreak and helplessness of those years, watching someone he cared about fight an illness that pulled her further away each time she tried to regain control. Sadly, in 1999, only 2 years after they married, Noreen died under tragic circumstances. Her death was ruled accidental and tied to her struggle with addiction. It was a devastation Shatner carried heavily, a wound that never fully healed and shaped the way he later approached relationships, privacy, and grief. In 2001, he married Elizabeth Anderson Martin. Their marriage lasted nearly 20 years and represented a calmer, more stable chapter in his life. Elizabeth shared his interest in horses, design, and the quieter aspects of living, and together they shaped the later versions of his long-owned Los Angeles home. They traveled, collaborated, and built a rhythm that balanced his public work with a more private domestic life. But even a long partnership can reach its limit. And after almost 2 decades, the marriage ended in divorce in 2020. They parted without scandal, only an acknowledgement that their lives had begun moving in different directions. Through all of these marriages and all of the challenges woven into them, Shatner's dedication to his daughters remained steady. Leslie, Elizabeth, and Melanie lived through every stage of his rise and fall, watching their father rebuild after career collapse, reinvent himself in new roles, and ultimately form the financial foundation that would change the trajectory of the family decades later. The emotional weight of each marriage, the highs and lows, and the losses and recoveries shaped the man who eventually created the fortune his family now stands to inherit. The personal weight of those years also shaped the way Shatner handled some of the public storms that came later. Even in his older age, controversy still found him, and sometimes he invited it with a kind of dry humor that people weren't always prepared for. In 2006, during a period when many celebrities carefully managed their public image, Shatner did something that felt almost surreal. He auctioned off a kidney stone he had passed. But it wasn't a publicity stunt for shock value. He actually turned it into charity. Golden Palace purchased the stone for roughly $25,000, and Shatner immediately redirected the money to Habitat for Humanity to help build homes. It was unusual, even odd, but it showed how Shatner could take the bizarre, the unexpected, and the uncomfortable moments and find a way to turn them into something useful. His relationship with his original Star Trek cast, however, remained far more complicated. Behind the cameras, the Enterprise crew was never the harmonious family fans imagined. There were long-standing tensions, some rooted in old arguments, others tied to professional slights or simple personality clashes that deepened over decades. The most public rift was between Shatner and George Takei. Their disagreements played out in interviews, memoirs, and convention chatter, with complaints about disrespect, event invitations, and stories about who did or didn't support whom. Some of the barbs were lighthearted, others weren't. Shatner often dismissed the conflicts as misunderstandings or exaggerated grievances. But the tension lingered and became part of the mythos surrounding the cast long after the series ended. But the moment that drew the harshest headlines of all was Leonard Nimoy's funeral. In 2015, when Nimoy passed away, fans expected Shatner to be present at the service. Instead, he was across the country at a long-scheduled charity event, which he refused to abandon because people had paid and traveled to attend. When the news broke that he wasn't at the funeral, criticism erupted. Commentators framed it as disrespectful, and social media turned it into a spectacle. Shatner addressed the controversy publicly, explaining that he honored his commitment to the charity, and that he participated in memorial events for Nimoy afterward. But the judgment had already spread. The world tends to prefer simple narratives, and the truth that obligations sometimes collide in painful ways was lost in the noise. This incident became another reminder that for Shatner, fame magnifies every decision, even the ones made with the best intentions. But the controversies didn't end there. His convention appearances, another major part of his career, brought their own friction. As one of the biggest names on the circuit, his fees were higher, his lines longer, and his expectations stricter. Some fans complained about accessibility or pricing, others about his demeanor at certain events. But the criticisms weren't unique to him, because every legacy actor in the convention sphere faces similar scrutiny. However, with Shatner, everything felt louder because of the cultural weight of his character. At times, he pushed back, clarifying policies or explaining the behind-the-scenes demands of these events. Other times, he simply moved forward, treating the noise as part of the ecosystem that comes with being tied to a franchise as large as Star Trek. Sadly, age presented another kind of challenge. As Shatner moved into his 80s and 90s, the industry watched him with a blend of skepticism and fascination. People questioned whether he could keep performing. They doubted his stamina, his voice, and his relevance. And each time, Shatner answered in the most direct way possible. He kept working. He took roles. He recorded albums. He wrote books. He stood on stages and delivered entire shows with clarity and wit. He leaned into public speaking, embraced interviews, and pushed forward with projects that most people decades younger would hesitate to take on. When others slowed down, he accelerated, determined not to let age reduce him to a symbolic figure. This refusal to fade quietly became even more evident when he traveled to space. At 90 years old, he joined a Blue Origin mission and became the oldest person to reach the edge of the cosmos. It was a moment layered with symbolism, Captain Kirk, the fictional spacefarer, finally crossing the boundary for real. But for Shatner, the experience wasn't triumphant. It was overwhelming, emotional, and far heavier than the media expected. His post-flight comments surprised people. Instead of marveling at the technology or celebrating the achievement, he spoke about the fragility of Earth, the starkness of space, and the profound sadness he felt looking into the void. Speaking to Variety about the trip, he said, "My trip to space was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral. It was among the strongest feelings of grief I have ever encountered. The contrast between the vicious coldness of space and the warm nurturing of Earth below filled me with overwhelming sadness. Every day, we are confronted with the knowledge of further destruction of Earth at our hands, the extinction of animal species and of flora and fauna, things that took 5 billion years to evolve, and suddenly we will never see them again because of the interference of mankind. It filled me with dread." While some praised his honesty, others criticized him, arguing over the meaning of space tourism and its environmental cost. Shatner is known for turning personal experience into philanthropy and discourse. He's used the attention to talk about conservation, climate awareness, and the need to protect the planet he had just seen from an entirely new perspective. Through all of these incidents, Shatner has held on to the same mixture of resilience and self-awareness that carried him through the darkest periods of his life. He simply kept moving, kept working, and kept using the spotlight as a tool rather than a burden, even when it burned uncomfortably bright. And that's why he's been able to amass an enormous fortune for his family that's completely shocking. What do you think about William Shatner's financial success? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.